we found out shortly after his birth that he was born with a rare genetic condition called trisomy 5p, and it affected every one of his cells. And that particular genetic mutation is pretty profound in terms of the way that it's expressed. And he had a lot of health issues and surgeries, but the biggest one, or the one that was the most life-threatening, was his respiratory system. So his whole airway was about 50% smaller than it should be. And there was also a floppiness, like they call a malacia as well. So it was pretty impossible for him to breathe like that without a lot of help.
Ultimately, when it came back that it was this incredibly rare condition that maybe only affects 1 out of 20, 30, 40 million children born a year, and I think the doctors and the medical professionals had a hard time telling us that this was essentially a terminal condition. Mm-hmm. The closest that they got was saying his prognosis was poor, which, not being medical professionals ourselves,
didn't make a whole lot of sense.
Didn't mean to us the same thing that it would to someone who's trained in the medical profession.
So do you feel like they were talking in coded language?
And yes, I mean, it was interesting because they wanted to give us this diagnosis as soon as they got the results back. It had like come in that morning, and they were sharing it immediately, but they didn't specifically know what it meant, other than this article, this printout that they had pulled down from UNIQUE, which is a rare chromosome sort of family advocacy group, right? That they, UNIQUE has sort of tried to document where they could the few children that have all these rare conditions. And so they had printed something out from UNIQUE. And then I remember the geneticist walked in, and again, I understand that they don't receive specific training for this, and I really want that to change, because I'm sure it was a hard thing for them to do. But they walked in and they were saying, the first thing they said was, this is so extremely rare. We've never seen it here. And we think that most babies who have this condition are miscarriages. And so that was the first thing that they said, and it was just like, what? I didn't understand, the information's coming in, and in that moment you're sort of out of body, because something really serious is being delivered here. And I'm holding the baby, like I'm holding Vigo. And they said, they sort of started, this will cause respiratory infections and developmental delay and physical delay and cognitive impairment and something. And I was like, okay, well, that's just a lot of really vague things.
Yeah, all of that is, even though we understand what it means, we have good education and vocabularies, but it's still coded, right? What does developmental delay mean? Does it mean he's eventually going to catch up? That's not what it means, They
didn't say nonverbal, but all the children are nonverbal. So they just sort of like said, and then one of them said sort of like, well, I don't know if I asked, are you saying he's going to die? And they were like, no. I mean, he could live until he's maybe 14. Or he just threw out this random number, 14. And I was like, what? Until what are you talking about? Well,
because up until that point for us, our point of view is like, well, we expect that our child is going to outlive us, You see, nobody had said, like, we thought, okay, well, maybe he'll be in a wheelchair because he's got club feet, and we didn't even, we're still trying to figure that out. But nobody had said, like, he's going to die before you.
No, that was the way that they said it. maybe you could live until he's 14. And then they said, well, some kids with really good advances in care, and some kids who have severe genetic conditions, maybe they could live until they're 40. They were just sort of throwing out these numbers. I remember them saying that and thinking, you don't know what you're talking about, and I don't understand anything of what you're talking about.
And it's interesting. I feel like they were trying to give us hope, but they hadn't yet delivered the news that we were in a hopeless situation.
Or that hope was going to have a totally different definition other than longevity or like a typical lifespan, right?
It's almost as if they were trying to give us hope in anticipation of us wanting it and needing it. But they didn't tell us that we would even want or need it yet. So we're like, why are you handing us this hope? What do we need it for? You haven't told us what we need it for yet,
And that's the other thing they kept saying was, and again, I think this is very much coming from like a medical expert perspective, especially geneticists, where they're looking at, they try to consider like a whole population, whatever the number of people, the sample sizes or whatever. And they said, well, the really good news about having something so rare is that, it could, his outcome could be really different from the other 3 people that we have read about who, died. You know what I mean? And they were just like, well, but maybe he's different because it's such a small sample size.
Right.
I didn't understand why that was good at all. I was like, that did not translate in that moment.
Yeah, I believe the quote was, he could be the one that changes history, because there's so little known. All it takes is one case to change things.
Yeah.
So I'm sure it was all very well-meaning. It came from a good place, but it was too early for that, right? First, we need to understand what situation we were in that would require hope, that would require that. And when people are afraid to talk about death, what you end up getting is kind of a lot of random gobbledygook.